The cedar planks went up on a Saturday morning in late April, when the dogwoods along Maple Ridge Drive were still holding their white blooms, and the neighborhood looked like something out of a real estate brochure. I'd measured twice, checked the property survey 3 times, and made sure every post sat 6 inches inside my boundary line. The fence was exactly 5 feet 11 inches tall, 1 inch below the HOA's 6-foot maximum, and stained a neutral cedar tone that matched half the decks in the subdivision. My backyard had needed that fence for 2 years. The Henderson's German Shepherd had a habit of cutting through my yard to chase squirrels, tearing up the flower beds my wife had spent 3 springs perfecting. The teenage kids from the corner house used my lawn as a shortcut to the community pool, and every time I let my own dog out, I had to watch him like a hawk to make sure he didn't bolt into the street. The fence solved all of that. It was clean, professional, and exactly what I needed. I finished the installation by Sunday afternoon, stood back with a beer in my hand, and admired the work. The posts were level, the gate swung smooth. My wife came out and smiled for the first time in weeks. Our dog, a 10-year-old lab named Cooper, sniffed the perimeter and settled into the grass with the kind of contentment that only comes from finally having his own space. Monday morning, I found the letter. It was tucked into the mailbox, not mailed, but hand-delivered. The Maple Ridge Homeowners Association letterhead sat at the top, formatted in that serif font that's supposed to look official and important. The letter informed me that my fence was in violation of Article 7, Section 4 of the community's covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I had failed to submit an architectural review application prior to construction. The fence, regardless of its compliance with height and material restrictions, was therefore unauthorized. I had 30 days to submit a retroactive application or remove the fence entirely. I read it twice. Then I pulled out the CC and Rs I'd received when we bought the house 4 years ago. The binder was thick, the kind of document that gets signed at closing and then shoved into a drawer because no one actually reads 70 pages of legal language about mailbox colors and lawn ornament restrictions. Article 7, Section 4 was there, plain as day. Any exterior modification, fences, sheds, decks, pergolas, even mailbox replacements, required advance written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. The application had to include drawings, material specifications, and a site plan. The committee had 30 days to respond. If they didn't respond, the application was considered denied. I hadn't submitted anything. I'd assumed that staying within the published guidelines was enough. It wasn't. I called the HOA management office that afternoon. Got a woman named Brenda who sounded like she'd had this conversation 100 times before. She was polite, but firm. The rules existed for a reason. The application process ensured neighborhood consistency. I could submit the paperwork now, and the committee would review it at their next meeting in 3 weeks. I asked what happened if they denied it. She paused. Then she said that the committee had the authority to require removal of any non-approved structure. If the homeowner didn't comply, the HOA could remove it themselves and bill the homeowner for the cost. I looked out the kitchen window at the fence, at Cooper lying in the shade it created, at my wife's flower beds, finally protected from the neighborhood's foot traffic and wandering animals. I told Brenda I'd submit the application. I didn't tell her what I was already starting to plan. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday, slipped into my mailbox between a credit card offer and a grocery store circular. Official HOA letterhead. Thick paper stock that probably cost more per sheet than my entire fence project. Notice of violation. Unapproved exterior modification. I read it standing at the mailbox, my coffee going cold in my other hand. The language was bureaucratic and bloodless. Section 4.7 of the Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions. Architectural Review Committee approval required for all exterior structures. 14 days to submit retroactive application or remove the fence entirely. I'd lived here 6 years, put up Christmas lights every December, mowed my lawn every Sunday, paid my dues on time. The fence was cedar, 6 feet tall, stained a tasteful brown that matched half the houses on the block. It kept my dog in the yard and gave my daughter a place to play, without me watching her every second. The fence wasn't the problem. The problem was I hadn't asked permission. I called the number on the letter. A woman named Patricia answered, her voice pleasant in that customer service way that meant nothing good. "Oh yes, Mr. Chen. We sent that notice because we have no record of your application." I wasn't aware I needed one. "It's in the CC and RS you signed at closing." I didn't remember signing anything about fences. I remembered signing my name 47 times in 2 hours, while my realtor checked her phone, and the title company notary asked if I needed another pen. "Can I submit the application now?" "Of course. There's a $200 review fee. The committee meets monthly. Next meeting is in 5 weeks. And if they say no," a pause, "then you'll need to remove the fence." I submitted the application that afternoon, paid the fee, took photographs from 6 angles, filled out forms asking for dimensions, materials, purpose, and aesthetic justification. I wrote that it matched the neighborhood character and provided safety for my family. The rejection letter arrived 4 weeks later. "The Architectural Review Committee has determined that your fence does not comply with community standards. Cedar fencing is not listed among approved materials. Additionally, the structure was installed without prior approval, demonstrating disregard for community procedures." There were cedar fences on Maple Street. I'd seen them. I drove through the neighborhood that evening counting. 7 houses, 7 cedar fences that looked exactly like mine. I called Patricia again. "Those fences were grandfathered in," she said, "installed before the 2019 rule revision." "What's the approved material? Vinyl or wrought iron? The list is in the updated guidelines." "Can I replace it with vinyl?" "You'll need to submit a new application." "Another $200? "Yes." I didn't have another $200 to throw at a committee that had already decided I was the problem. I had a mortgage and a daughter starting kindergarten and a car that needed new tires. The second notice arrived 10 days later. Final warning, compliance required within 7 days. I tried calling Patricia, got voicemail, left a message asking for an extension, explaining I needed time to save for the replacement. She didn't call back. On day 6, I came home from work to find a truck in my driveway. 2 men in company shirts standing at my fence with clipboards. One of them saw me and walked over holding out a work order. "We're scheduled to remove this tomorrow morning. HOA contract. You'll be invoiced for labor and disposal." I looked at the work order. $1,100. "You can't just..." "It's in your CC and Rs, sir. Section 8.3. HOA has right to remedy violations at owner expense after proper notice." They left. I stood in my driveway holding the work order, watching my daughter play behind the fence that would be gone in 12 hours. The sound came at 7:43 in the morning. Not the polite knock of a neighbor or the distant hum of a lawnmower, but the hydraulic groan of heavy machinery turning onto my street. I was at the kitchen counter, coffee halfway to my lips, when the beeping started. That insistent reverse warning that construction vehicles make. 3 short bursts, pause, 3 more. Getting closer. I set the mug down and moved to the front window. A white pickup truck with the HOA Management Company logo idled at the curb. Behind it, a small excavator rolled forward on treads, its bucket raised like a threat. 2 men in high-visibility vests stood near my property line, one holding a clipboard, the other pointing at my fence. My fence, the one I'd spent 2 weekends building. The one that matched every specification in the architectural guidelines I'd read cover to cover before driving a single post. I was outside before I'd consciously decided to move. "What are you doing?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. The man with the clipboard didn't look up. "HOA ordered removal. You were notified." I was notified of a violation I didn't commit. That fence is compliant. Board voted Removal authorized. He made a check mark on his sheet. You can file an appeal after the fact. After the fact. After they'd already destroyed what I'd built. The excavator operator revved the engine. The bucket lowered toward the first post. Stop! I pulled out my phone. I'm documenting this. Document whatever you want. The clipboard man finally met my eyes. Doesn't change the work order. The bucket bit into the earth next to my fence post. The wood shuddered. The operator adjusted his angle and pushed forward, and the post snapped at ground level with a crack that I felt in my chest. He moved to the next one. I stood there recording as they worked their way down the line. Each post took less than a minute. Pull, snap, toss aside. The fence panels clattered as they fell, the sound sharp in the morning quiet. Neighbors' curtains moved. No one came outside. The whole thing took 17 minutes. When they finished, my front yard looked like a construction site. Splintered wood in piles. Torn earth where the posts had been. The property line suddenly naked and exposed in a way that felt personal. The clipboard man walked over and held out a sheet of paper. Removal completed. Sign here acknowledging. I'm not signing anything. He shrugged and made another note. Refusal to acknowledge documented. You'll receive an invoice for removal costs within 10 business days, plus the original fine for the violation. He glanced at the wreckage. Should have just taken it down yourself when you had the chance. Would have been cheaper. They loaded the excavator back onto its trailer. The whole convoy rolled away as efficiently as it had arrived, leaving me standing in my front yard surrounded by the pieces of something I'd built with my own hands. I walked the property line slowly, phone still recording. The destruction was thorough, professional. They hadn't left a single post standing, hadn't missed a single panel. The message was clear. The HOA had the power, and they wanted me to know it. I stopped at the corner where my property met the access road, the HOA used for their maintenance vehicles. The road they'd paved with community funds, the road that ran right along my property line. That's when I noticed something I'd never paid attention to before. The survey stakes from when I'd bought the house. Still there, faded but visible, marking the exact boundary of what was mine. I looked at the access road, then back at the stakes, then at the empty space where my fence had been, and I started to smile. The morning after they demolished my fence, I sat at my kitchen table with a laptop, 3 different tabs open, and a growing sense of something I hadn't felt in days. Control. I'd spent the night angry. I'd spent the morning getting practical. The HOA operated under a specific set of rules. So did I. The question was whether they'd actually followed theirs, and whether I could use mine. I started with the CC and R's covenants, conditions, and restrictions, and the document every homeowner in Ridgemont Estates signed when they bought their property. I'd skimmed it once, years ago, when we closed. Now I read every word. Section 4.7. Architectural Guidelines. Any exterior modification required written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. Fences had to be approved for height, material, and placement. I'd never submitted my fence for approval. That part was on me. But Section 9.3. Enforcement Procedures. Before the HOA could take corrective action, they had to provide written notice, 14 days to remedy the violation. If the homeowner failed to comply, the HOA could remedy it themselves and bill the homeowner for the cost. I pulled up my email, searched for anything from the HOA in the past month. 3 results. 2 were newsletters about the community barbecue. 1 was the violation notice I'd received 4 days before they tore the fence down. 4 days, not 14. I opened the notice again. Read it slowly this time, looking for the language that mattered. Immediate corrective action required. That phrase sat at the bottom of the first paragraph. I searched the CC and Rs for it. Found it in Section 9.4, Emergency Violations. The HOA could bypass the 14-day notice period if the violation posed an immediate health or safety hazard. My fence had posed no hazard. It was sturdy, well-built, and bothered no one except Patricia Hendricks' sense of aesthetic uniformity. They'd misapplied their own rules. I opened a new document and started taking notes. Dates, sections, the gap between what they'd claimed and what they'd actually done. Then I moved to the second question. What could I build that they couldn't touch? I pulled up the county's zoning ordinances, residential setbacks, height restrictions, permit requirements. Fences under 6 feet didn't require a permit. But the HOA's rules capped decorative fencing at 4 feet in front yards, 6 in back. Walls were different, retaining walls specifically. Structural barriers designed to manage grade changes or prevent erosion. The county allowed them up to 6 feet without a permit, provided they met engineering standards. The HOA's, CC and R's mentioned fences, hedges, and decorative barriers. They did not mention retaining walls. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the kitchen window at the empty space where my fence had been. My property sat slightly higher than the access road the HOA used for maintenance vehicles. Not much, maybe 8 inches, but enough to justify a retaining wall if I wanted to formalize the grade separation. Enough to justify a steel-reinforced concrete barrier running the full length of my property line. I opened a new search. Local contractors specializing in commercial-grade retaining walls. The first result was a company that built highway sound barriers. The second did industrial site work. The third specialized in security installations. I clicked the third link. Their portfolio showed walls around utility substations, government facilities, and one particularly impressive barrier surrounding a private estate. Clean lines, poured concrete with steel reinforcement, modular construction that could go up in days rather than weeks. I filled out their contact form, described the project as a grade management solution with secondary security benefits, requested a consultation. Then I went back to the CC and RS one more time. Read Section 4.7 again, looking for the exact language. Fences, decorative walls, and ornamental barriers require ARC approval. Retaining walls were structural, functional, they weren't ornamental. I closed the laptop and looked out at the empty yard one more time. They'd followed their rules poorly. I was going to follow mine perfectly. The county zoning office smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee. I'd been standing at the counter for 20 minutes, waiting while the clerk disappeared into a back room with my property survey. Through the scratched plexiglass partition, I could hear the muffled sound of a copy machine running. When she finally returned, she slid 3 documents across the counter. Your setback requirements, she said, tapping the first page. 5 feet from the property line for any structure under 8 feet tall. After that, you need additional permits. I studied the numbers. 5 feet. The HOA's own guidelines allowed walls up to 7 feet 11 inches without special approval, provided they met aesthetic standards, which meant nothing really, since the Architectural Committee had never bothered to define what that meant. They'd been too busy writing rules about mailbox colors. And if I want to build right here? I pointed to a spot on the survey, right along the access road the HOA used to reach their maintenance shed. She pulled out a different map, this one showing the subdivision's internal roads. That's private HOA property on one side, your lot on the other. You can build anything you want on your side of the line, long as it meets setback and height requirements, even if it makes their road harder to use. She looked at me over her reading glasses. Sir, I process permits. I don't mediate neighbor disputes. If it's legal, it's legal. I paid for certified copies of everything and walked back to my truck. In the passenger seat sat a folder I'd been building for 2 weeks. Inside, photographs of every wall, fence, and decorative barrier in the subdivision. The Hendersons had a brick wall. The Kowalskis had stacked stone. The Pratts had installed corrugated metal panels, painted to look like wood. Modern farmhouse aesthetic, they'd called it. Not one of them had been cited. Not one had received a violation notice. At home, I spread everything across the kitchen table. The property survey, the zoning requirements, the HOA's own architectural guidelines, photographs of approved structures. I measured distances, calculated angles, and sketched rough diagrams on graph paper. The access road was 12 feet wide where it ran past my property line. The HOA's landscaping truck was 8 feet wide, their maintenance trailer another 6. They needed the full width to make the turn into their storage area. I drew a line 5 feet from my property boundary, then another line 7 feet 11 inches beyond that. The space between them represented what I could legally build. Steel would be expensive, but it would last, and it would send a message that wood never could. I called 3 contractors the next morning. The first 2 declined once I explained what I wanted. The third, a guy named Rick, who'd done commercial work before retiring to residential projects, listened to the whole story without interrupting. "You're sure about this?" he asked when I finished. "They tore down my fence without warning, destroyed my property, then threatened to fine me for the mess they created. I'm not asking if you're justified. I'm asking if you're sure." I looked out the window at the empty space where my fence had stood, at the property line I'd marked with wooden stakes, at the access road beyond it, where the HOA president had stood 3 weeks ago and told me I should have read the guidelines more carefully. I'm sure. Then I'll draw up plans. Industrial steel posts, corrugated panels, powder-coated finish. We'll make it look intentional, artistic even, and we'll build it exactly where you want it. He quoted me a price that made me wince. I agreed anyway. Some lessons cost more than others. The HOA was about to learn one they'd never forget. The contractor's truck arrived at 6:45 on a Saturday morning, which was the earliest allowed under county noise ordinances, and exactly 15 minutes before the HOA board president typically left for his weekend golf game. I timed it that way. I wanted an audience. 2 men stepped out, surveyed the property line I'd marked with stakes and string, and nodded. The older one, whose name was Martinez, had listened to my specifications without a single raised eyebrow. When I'd explained what I wanted and where, he'd simply quoted me a price and a timeline. Professional. No questions about why. The steel panels came off the flatbed in sections. Each one was 10 feet tall, powder-coated in a neutral grey that matched the approved HOA color palette exactly. I had the paint code documentation in a folder on my porch, along with every other piece of paper that mattered. The panels weren't decorative. They were industrial grade, the kind used for commercial loading docks and warehouse security. Heavy enough that it took both men to maneuver each section into place. By 7:15, the first panel was upright. By 7:30, 3 more had joined it. That's when Richard appeared at the property line, still in his bathrobe, coffee mug in hand. He stood there for a long moment, watching the workers bolt the panels to the concrete footings we'd poured the week before. His face went through several distinct phases. Confusion first, then recognition, then something that looked a lot like panic. "What the hell is this?" he called across the distance. I walked over slowly, carrying my own coffee. "Good morning, Richard. Just making some improvements. All permitted, all approved. You can't build a wall here. Actually, I can. It's on my property, 6 inches inside my boundary line to be exact. And it meets every specification in the architectural guidelines. Height, color, setback requirements. I have the approval form if you'd like to see it." His jaw worked. "This wasn't what you submitted." The submission said privacy barrier 10 feet tall, grey finish. That's what this is. The 4th panel went up, then the 5th. The wall was taking shape now, running parallel to the access road the HOA used for maintenance vehicles. Not blocking it, not technically, just narrowing it considerably. "You're blocking access," Richard said. "I'm not blocking anything. The road is still there. It's just a bit tighter than it used to be. Our trucks won't fit through there." I sipped my coffee. "That sounds like a planning issue on your end." 2 more board members arrived within the next 20 minutes. Carol, the secretary, pulled up in her sedan and got out slowly, staring at the growing wall. Then Doug, the treasurer, who actually walked the length of it with a measuring tape, checking the setback himself. I watched him do the math, watched him realize that every inch was legal. By 9 o'clock, the wall was 2/3 complete. By 10:30, it was finished. Martinez and his partner packed up their tools, accepted my check, and drove away. The wall stood there, solid and immovable, reducing the access road from a comfortable 12 feet wide to barely 7. I knew the HOA's landscaping truck was 9 feet wide. I knew their waste management vehicle was 8.5. I knew the contractor they used for roof repairs drove a 10-foot box truck. Richard stood at the end of the wall, his coffee long since cold, his golf game long since missed. He was making phone calls. Lots of them. I could see him gesturing, pacing, his voice carrying across the morning air in frustrated bursts. I went inside, closed the door, and waited for Monday. The first truck arrived at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was already awake. Had been for an hour, coffee in hand, standing at my kitchen window with a view I'd earned through 3 weeks of construction dust and 2 decades of property tax payments. The landscaping company's F350 turned onto Maple Ridge Drive at its usual crawling pace, trailer loaded with mowers and blowers, headed for the common area maintenance they performed every Tuesday and Friday. The driver saw the wall 50 feet out. I watched his brake lights flare. He sat there for 20 seconds. Then he reversed, angled toward the shoulder, tried to find room to squeeze past. The wall ran exactly to the edge of my property line on both sides. My property line, as it happened, came within 8 feet of the road's edge on the north side. The truck and trailer together measured 9 feet wide. The math was simple. The solution was not. He tried anyway. Got the truck's nose past, trailer wheels still on pavement, then stopped when his passenger mirror came within inches of the steel. I could see him on his phone through the windshield, calling someone, probably his dispatcher, possibly the HOA office, definitely not getting through. By 7:15 there were 3 vehicles backed up behind him, a landscaping truck, an HOA board member's Lexus, a pool maintenance van that serviced the community center twice weekly. Maple Ridge Drive was the only access road to the eastern half of the development. 14 homes, the community center, 2 retention ponds that required regular maintenance, all of it now on the wrong side of my wall. I refilled my coffee and watched Richard Hendricks climb out of his Lexus. He stood in the middle of the road, hands on hips, staring at the wall like it had personally insulted him. Then he walked up my driveway. I met him at the door before he could knock. "This is unacceptable," he said. "The wall." I kept my voice level, friendly even. "It's fully compliant, 8 feet tall, steel construction, professionally installed. I have the permits and the HOA architectural approval right here, if you'd like to review them again." His jaw worked. "You're blocking access to half the neighborhood." "I'm not blocking anything. I'm standing in my kitchen. The wall is standing on my property. If there's an access issue, that sounds like a planning problem. You know exactly what you're doing." I sipped my coffee. I know exactly what I'm allowed to do. There's a difference. The landscaping truck driver had given up. He was unhitching his trailer in the middle of the road, trying to turn around. The pool maintenance van was already backing up, hazards flashing. Behind them, a resident's car had joined the queue, horns starting to blare. "We can take legal action," Richard said. "For what?" "Building a compliant structure on my own property. I'd be interested to see that filing." I paused. "Of course, I'd have to countersue for the fence you demolished without proper notice. and the emotional distress, and the property damage. My attorney's already drawn up the paperwork. We've just been waiting to see if you'd like to go that route. His face had gone red. Not the flush of embarrassment. The deeper color of a man realizing he'd miscalculated. "We could have worked this out," he said. "You could have left my fence standing." He stood there another moment, then turned and walked back to his Lexus. The line of vehicles was reversing now, one by one, backing down Maple Ridge Drive toward the main entrance. It would take them an extra 12 minutes to loop around through the west side access. 12 minutes, twice a day, every day, for every service vehicle and half the residents. I watched until the last truck disappeared. Then I called my attorney and told him to expect contact. The first truck arrived at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, right on schedule. I watched from my kitchen window as the HOA's landscaping contractor pulled up to the service road that ran behind the properties on our block. The same service road they'd used for 15 years without a second thought. The same service road that now had a 12-foot steel barrier blocking it completely. The driver sat there for a full minute, engine idling, probably radioing someone. Then he backed up, turned around, and left. By noon, I'd counted 4 trucks. Landscaping, pool maintenance, the waste management company that serviced the community dumpsters. Every single one turned back. The service road was the only access point wide enough for commercial vehicles. The front streets were residential, with weight restrictions clearly posted. They had nowhere else to go. My phone rang at 1:15 p.m., restricted number. I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was Patricia, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Mr. Chen, your structure is causing significant operational disruptions. We need to discuss this immediately. Call me back." I deleted it and made myself lunch. The next morning, I found a notice taped to my front door. Emergency HOA board meeting scheduled for that evening. Agenda item: unauthorized obstruction of community infrastructure. I folded it carefully and added it to my file. Right behind the permit from the county, the surveyor's report confirming my property lines, and the architectural approval form the HOA had stamped 3 weeks earlier. The meeting room was packed. Patricia sat at the head table flanked by 2 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Homeowners filled every chair, most of them looking confused about why they'd been summoned. Patricia didn't waste time. "Mr. Chen has erected a structure that is preventing essential services from accessing community facilities. This is unacceptable and must be removed immediately." I raised my hand. She ignored me. "The board is prepared to take legal action if necessary. This kind of selfish behavior affects everyone in this community." "Point of order," I said, standing up. "I'd like to address the board." Patricia's jaw tightened, but she nodded. I walked to the front and placed 3 documents on the table. Building permit from the county, approved architectural review form from this HOA signed by you, Patricia, and a surveyor's report confirming the barrier is entirely on my property, set back the required distance from the property line. Silence. "The barrier meets every specification in the HOA guidelines: height, materials, color, setback requirements. You approved it yourselves." "We didn't know you intended to block the service road," Patricia said. "The application showed exact placement. You had the surveyor's diagram. You approved it." One of the other board members leaned forward. "But you knew it would block access." "I knew it would be on my property, within my rights, and fully compliant with all regulations." I paused. "The same way you knew my fence was 6 inches too tall before you had it torn down without giving me a chance to fix it." The room stayed quiet. "So here's what happens next," I continued. "The barrier stays. It's legal, it's approved, and it's not going anywhere. If you want access to that service road, you'll need to find an alternate route. Or," I looked directly at Patricia, "we can talk about reasonable solutions, like maybe not destroying people's property over 6 inches." Patricia's face had gone pale. She looked at the documents, then at the other board members, then back at me. "We'll take this under advisement," she finally said. I walked out of that meeting knowing I'd won, not because they'd apologized, not because they'd admitted fault, but because 3 days later, my phone rang with an offer to settle. New fence, their expense, no admission of liability. I accepted. The barrier came down the following week. Sometimes you don't need to burn bridges. You just need to block the road long enough for people to remember why bridges matter.